Hello everyone and welcome to those who are just joining this webinar. My name is John Powlett. I'll be chairing tonight. I'm just going to wait a minute or so just for people to come in. Just bear with us before we make a start. Okay, yeah, the numbers are still going up, so okay, all right, well, it's 1 minute past, so we'll make a start. So hello, welcome everybody to the West Country Forum. Thank you for joining us. The last one of these was held in November. My name's John Powlett. I work for JFG Communications and I'll be chairing this forum tonight on behalf of GCP. This community forum will include 3 presentations of GCP projects in the Greater Cambridge area. First up, we're going to have a new road classification for Cambridge. We'll then have the Cambourne to Cambridge environmental impact assessments, and we'll finish with Greater Cambridge greenways. We have a lot to get through this evening, but of course, there'll always be opportunities to ask questions about each of the projects following each of the presentations. If you have questions about other GCP projects not on the agenda for this evening, please email us. I'll get my colleague George to add the email address into the chat in case anyone doesn't have it. And then the team at GCP Comms can pick that up. So moving on, just to some housekeeping rules really, for those of you who haven't attended one of these before, and to remind those of you who attended last time in November. This community forum is being run in a webinar format. That means that you can't see each other. We've got our cameras on, but that's the way that we do it, and that's partly because of the numbers. Thank you, George, for putting that email address in the chat. Most of us have got used to Zoom meetings now after the pandemic and everything over the last couple of years. Everyone's obviously joining over their Wi-Fi connections, some people in the office, some people at home. So please bear with us if there are any outages, particularly from the presenters or from myself as chair, or indeed if people's pets or loved ones decide to come into the room. We'll do our best to keep things on track and keep things professional. If you would like to ask a question during the presentations, please wait until the end of the presentation. I'm not going to be stopping for any sort of clarifications during the presentation because the presenters will be sharing their screens. So please, if you wait till the end, and then if you stick your virtual hand up on Zoom, for those of you who don't know it, you should see at the bottom, it says raise hand, click that. I should get a notification of the order of people who's doing, and I'll come to people. If we're getting a lot of questions on common themes, I might string those themes together, but I will get to you. If people post statements that aren't questions or rhetorical, we will be picking them up. We'll be picking everything up from this meeting and taking it back, and any kind of feedback as well. But obviously I won't be, posing comments as questions. Please know also, you may have seen the red button in the top left-hand corner. This is a public meeting and it is being recorded, just to make you all aware of that. Please also, as part of the housekeeping, I'd just like to politely ask everybody to be polite and courteous to each other's. People may have different views and everything, and also to our officers here who are presenting. If you could please do it. As I say, I'll chair it. We appreciate that people may have differences of opinion, but please try and be polite and courteous throughout this meeting, which would be greatly appreciated. I'm now going to introduce the speakers and the presenters for tonight. So we have a panel, including myself as chair and the 3 speakers. For the new road classification, we have Richard Preston. Joe Baker will be covering the second presentation, which is the Cambourne to Cambridge environmental impact assessments. And finally, the greenways will be presented by Lisa Bloomer. This forum is also presented by, supported by the GCP comms team. Some of those who have the cameras on at the moment, they will be turning the cameras off, but they will be assisting me and the presenters in terms of with the questions and the technology and everything else, and taking stuff away. So there are our supporting cast list, and thank you for those for supporting this. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Richard, who's our first presenter on the new road classification, Cambridge, and I will mute myself. Over to you, Richard, who will be sharing his screen.
Thank you, John. Welcome everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see the presentation. Okay, a new road classification for Cambridge. Well, I suppose the first question is, why are we reviewing the classification at this stage? Well, the road classification in Cambridge hasn't been looked at since the early 1980s, when a review was undertaken following the opening of the Cambridge Northern Western bypasses. Since that time, there's been significant change to the road network, and it's considered that the network needs to better reflect the changing priorities that we have, transport priorities, hence the need to do a review. That review needs to take into account some very significant policies and strategies, and is set out in the slides. Notably, we've got to focus on air quality, the declaration of a climate emergency, the government's decarbonising transport plan, the national walking and cycling strategy, and following the pandemic, the Bus Back Better initiative. We also need to ensure that the review is consistent with the local transport and connectivity plan that's been developed by the joint authority. So what are the key aims of the review? Well, these focus very much on quality of life issues. And we need to make sure that we are supporting the challenges that are offered by climate change. We also want to focus very much on active travel to encourage people to undertake more physical activity on the road network and improve their health and well-being. We also aim to focus very much on reducing air quality by reducing congestion and encouraging that move towards more active travel and greater use of public transport. And perhaps an aspect that hasn't been focused on enough over the last 40 years is that issue of creating a greater sense of place within the highway network. Much of our attention has been focused on the highway network as a movement network, but hasn't really looked at the sense of place and how we can enhance that to improve people's enjoyment of the network. Now this slide shows the current road classification of the major roads in the city that came out of that early 80s review. And as you see, most of the major routes feeding into Cambridge are classified as A-class roads. Back in the early 80s, we first had a designated ring road, numbered as the A1134. But it's interesting to note at that stage, although we designated a ring road as a main circulatory tool, the A road classification was retained for some of the roads within the ring road, and that in many ways has encouraged a lot of traffic to continue to pass through the very heart of the city. So in terms of our ambition for the review, we want to try to achieve as many car, van and lorry trips to use as much of the main road network as possible, so that we can reduce traffic on the more local roads and streets in the city. Many of those local roads and streets are used as rat runs, particularly during peak periods, to avoid delays on perhaps the more major roads. And we want to remove that through traffic element, and we would achieve that by introducing point road closures, which are now commonly known as modal filters. And they would be implemented at certain points on some of these roads to ensure that access was maintained to properties, but it prevented through movements by private motor vehicles on those routes. This would mean that in terms of gaining access to destinations in the city, that we would be directing people around the major road network to allow them to reach their destination by the nearest junction from the main road network. So the potential outcomes from that review ambition, clearly journeys by private motor vehicle would be less direct and potentially longer, and perhaps an important issue given the cost of fuel at the moment, potentially more expensive. In future, many of our local streets would carry less traffic if we remove that through traffic element, and that would reduce congestion and pollution. But there may be increases on some of the main roads as a result. We would intend to undertake significant modelling of these various scenarios to make sure we fully understand what the implications are in terms of any potential transfer of traffic. And that information will allow us to consider what mitigation measures might be appropriate to address any of those increases on some of the major roads. Cyclists and scheduled buses would be allowed through those modal filter points because we clearly want to make those trips as reliable, pleasant and convenient as possible. So we've had a first stab at devising a new network, and it's based on 5 main categories of street. Now, perhaps I'm going to just jump ahead a slide here to look at those categories. We would have 2 categories of what we call distributor roads. The primary roads would be our main roads that traffic would use, and they would be the main movement backbone for the city. And they would be supported by secondary distributor roads that fill in some of the gaps between some of those major roads. That's particularly relevant to the east side of the city where we don't have as many radial routes feeding in. We would then have 2 levels of access street, area access streets and local access streets. As the name suggests, area access streets would provide access to larger parts of the city, and they would be underpinned by these local access streets that would then give access to more local areas of the city. The 5th category of street that we've identified is called Civic Streets. These would be mainly the small streets in the city centre where access for traffic could be restricted by time of day. Now, these are the names we've given these categories at this stage. They're not set in stone, and we're very keen to hear people's views on whether this categorization is appropriate for a new road classification. So using those categories of road and street, we've applied that to the current network as an initial idea. And we'd very much welcome feedback on this initial map. Clearly, there may be suggestions that some categories need to be changed, some roads may need to be deleted or added. We're very open to suggestions to see how that map needs to be modified to reach deliver the network we all aspire to. Now, from this, we've identified some key issues that we're very keen to get some feedback on. I've mentioned already the potential for traffic to be displaced from some of our more local roads onto the main road network. And clearly we need to make sure we're managing that situation. We have a particular issue in the city centre, given the potential for significant investment in the public transport network, which could see a potential doubling of the number of buses running on the city road network. At the present time, the interchange for buses in the city centre is focused in a very small area around Drummer Street. That area prior to the pandemic was already over capacity, and we don't feel that it's appropriate to continue to take even more buses through the heart of the city. So the suggestion is that we may need to displace some of those bus routes a little further out from their current interchange centre and dissipate that interchange function over a greater area. That would support giving more pedestrian cycling priority to many streets in the city centre. And the map shows those shown as the yellow coloured streets. We're very keen to get some feedback on whether the area we're suggesting that could be subject to greater pedestrian cycling priority is right, or whether it needs to be reduced in some way or potentially enlarged. We're also looking for feedback on how we treat taxis in terms of their use of the network. Currently, taxis, that's both hackney carriages and private hire cars, have a degree of exemption from many access restrictions on the road network. And we're asking whether we should continue along that route or whether we should take a slightly different approach. And we're also interested in people's views on whether we should continue to give the same degree of access to hackney carriages as we do to private hire cars. If we're talking about a wider pedestrianisation of the central area of the city, clearly that would raise questions about how we're going to manage deliveries to many properties in the city centre to ensure that the centre can continue to operate as it does. So we're looking at feedback on how we should manage those deliveries. We've suggested the potential for encouraging more of those deliveries to be consolidated and potentially using zero emission vehicles, that perhaps we could incentivize that approach by giving a greater degree of flexibility for deliveries to be made throughout the day. Clearly, the new classification needs to take into account road safety, and we're working very closely with our County Council colleagues to ensure that it aligns with the County Council road safety policies. Of course, when we're talking about filtering and controlling access across the network, there are bound to be special cases that need to be considered, and we recognise that there may be a series of requests for exemptions on a vehicle basis and user basis, and we're looking for some feedback on those issues. So in terms of what we're asking for feedback on at this first stage of the project, as I've said, we want feedback on those categories of streets. We want feedback on the plan that I've already showed you. We've also prepared this table that sets out, that gives some idea of the level of network accessibility we would give for particular modes of transport. Clearly, we're walking and cycling. We want to give as much freedom to access as much of the network as possible. And that's true of buses where they're scheduled to run. In terms of cars and commercial vehicles, if we went along the route that we're advocating, clearly they would have less access to the network, with some of the roads closed off in terms of through access. But I would emphasize that it's not the intention to deny access to properties. There would always be access available, but clearly the routes that people use would be perhaps less than they are at the present time. In terms of emergency service vehicles, as you'd expect, we want to make sure the network is as permeable to their movements as we can possibly make it. We're also interested in people's views around how we treat blue badge holders and the vehicles they use. This is a particularly difficult issue for us because a blue badge is issued to a person, not to a vehicle. And so we're asking for some feedback on what sort of exemptions we might offer for blue badge holders, and whether we should have a consistent approach for all blue badge holders, or whether perhaps we could have a two-tier system whereby those with more severe disabilities perhaps have a greater degree of access than those that perhaps are not as severely disabled. So the consultation process started on the 23rd of May. It runs through to the 18th of July, and we'd very much welcome feedback from as many stakeholders as we possibly can. And we've set up a series of public meetings. Details are available on our website, and you can see the dates set out there. So that's the end of the presentation, and I'll stop sharing my screen at this point.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'll now invite community members and councillors and people on the call to on the webinar, sorry, to raise their hand, asking questions. I'm just while they're doing that, there's just some questions have come in the chat that I'm just going to deal with initially. Somebody was asking about if they can't stay for this whole webinar, about the recording being available. It's going to be on the Greater Cambridge Partnership YouTube channel, and I'm going to ask my colleague George to put the link to that into the chat. If you subscribe to that, you'll receive a notification when it's on there. It may be on there tomorrow or shortly in the coming days. That answers that sort of bit of housekeeping. I'm now going to come to a question for you, Richard, which is about Eddington Avenue that's coming on the chat. So the question is about it. It was designed as a sustainable area. The route has become an unintended A route owing to its connection between Huntington Road and Madingley Road and the M11. It's quite a long question. I'm not going to read the rest of it out, but are you able to talk to that question specifically, Richard, or respond to it?
Yes, if you look on the plan that I showed earlier, our first stab at what a new network might look like, we have included the route through Eddington. I think I'm right in saying at the present time, the route is not formally adopted as public highway at the present time. I think it's still going through the adoption process. And we've suggested that that would become an access street under these arrangements. And that would mean that we would be looking to remove through traffic from that area if these proposals were endorsed by members and were taken forward. So we're well aware of the issues in that area, well aware of the level of through traffic that does use it, and understand the concerns over the impact that has on some of the non-motorized users in particular in that area. So we are alive to that issue.
Great, thank you very much for that response, Richard. I'm not seeing any raised hands. I hope that's not a technological failure on my point. So please, somebody from my team, shout out if that's not the case. Since we've had another question that's come into the chat, which I'm going to send your way again, Richard, which is, what is the difference between a B road changing to, I think they're meant to say road, it just says road, but I'm assuming that's a road, additional number of HGVs and large delivery vans. Does that, I don't know if you see that question, Richard, but does it make sense to you?
Yeah, I didn't quite catch all of the points there.
What's coming? It says, what is the difference between a B road changing to a? It just says a road. I'm not sure whether they were meant to put an A road in there. And then there's a comment below it saying additional numbers of HGVs or large delivery vans. And that's the question that's come in.
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but I'll try to answer it. Clearly at this stage, we've developed a series of the categories of roads we're suggesting. If that approach is adopted, we would then have to consider what category, how we classify those using the conventional road classification of A, B, and C roads, or the fourth category, which is unclassified. I think the expectation is that what we call the distributor roads would be A or B roads. They are designed to carry the most traffic, and generally they would be open to all forms of traffic, and they would be used by heavy commercial vehicles and light commercial vehicles as a result. That doesn't mean to say that there would never be any restrictions on those types of vehicles using those routes, but clearly when you're restricting heavy goods vehicles and light goods vehicles, you have to be aware that you still need to provide some route for them to use. And you need to take that into account if consideration was given to putting in restrictions on those types of vehicles. As an example, Victoria Road is part of the ring road system, but it does have a nighttime restriction on heavy goods vehicles because there are other routes that they could use to avoid that area. That's just as an example.
Great, thank you very much, Richard. Apologies, my colleagues are telling me that there are some yellow hands showing as raised. For some reason, I'm not seeing them, so I might need to call on Michaela or George to help me out here. Josh Grantham, you've put a message in the chat that you've got a raised hand, so I'll come to you first if that's okay. George, if you want to unmute Josh to take his question. I'm seeing it now. I'm seeing your hand now, Josh.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Josh.
Great. I just wanted to ask if there was a reason why the A14 and the M11 didn't come into discussions about potentially relieving some congestion or acting as a kind of optional distributor in the north. And I also just wanted to query whether you think this is quite a vehicular-based hierarchy and whether there needs to be some wider discussions on kind of categorizing or kind of bringing in the information from the LC WIP for pedestrians and cyclists and understanding how everything overlays.
Yeah, okay, Josh, I'll try to give you an answer to those points. In terms of the A14 and the M11, clearly they're outside of our remit. They are part of the National Road Network. We don't have any control over that. I think it's inevitable when you're reclassifying the roads in Cambridge, you will get some degree of transfer, possibly onto the A14 and the M11. As part of the consultation, we need to talk to National Highways to make sure they're aware of what's going on and for them to take into account any potential transfer that could come their way. But both those routes have been used for many years as part of a distribution network for the city, because clearly some people prefer to use those roads rather than go through the city itself. In terms of your second point about LC WIP, I think you've made a very good point there. This is the start of a process. We are doing a mapping exercise where we're taking all this information and compiling it to see where things align and where perhaps they don't align. And we will be looking at how the LC WIP sits within this first stab that we've had at redefining the network. But clearly, I think with many of the roads, many of the access roads that we have identified at this stage, if we do remove through traffic from them, the hope is that they will become far more attractive as routes for active travel. And we would assume that cyclists in particular would gain an awful lot from this.
Great, thank you for that answer, and thank you for your question, Josh. You'll be pleased to know that I can actually see hands now. It was actually user failure rather than technology letting me down. But I don't actually see any more hands. However, there are some more questions. There's some statements and comments that have come into the chat, and as I say, we're seeing them, and we'll certainly take them away. I'll just come to some questions for yourself again, Richard, that have come into the chat. One from Peter Lansoff, which is, what sort of mitigation measures have you in mind if the main road congestion becomes unacceptable?
I think that's a very good question, and quite a difficult one to answer at this stage. Clearly, we need to understand the scale of any change, and that would then, and also looking at the composition of that transfer, and that would inform a study into what mitigation measures might be appropriate. It might be some of those measures could take the form of physical changes to those roads to better manage that traffic. It could take the form of changes to the way signals operate to better manage some of those situations. I think it's important to emphasize that mitigation isn't only about managing motorized traffic on some of those roads, but it's also making sure that if main roads become busier, that they don't become increasingly difficult barriers for other users to cross, particularly non-motorized users, to make sure that we can still retain a degree of permeability across those roads, as well as looking at how we progress traffic along those particular routes.
Great, thank you, Richard. And another question here, which has come on about, is any consideration being given to a park and ride site on the Huntingdon Road?
I'm not sure that falls really within the scope of this project.
Right.
I know for many years there's been a question of whether Huntingdon Road should have a park and ride. I'm perhaps other colleagues might be able to help on this, but I'm not currently aware of any proposals for a park and ride on the Huntingdon Road, but others may.
Okay, we'll take that one away because
sorry,
Richard, to talk over you, but because it's not strictly road classification, so we'll take that one away. Right, there's another comment on there. Just looking at through the questions now, so please bear with me. I think you've missed. Have any considerations being? Have you considered collections as well as deliveries? That's this question. Apologies, Andrew. I did miss that. Sort of trying to go through them. Are you able to answer that, Richard?
Yes, we have, and that's a very good point, because I think too often we think of this as being a one-way process where goods are being brought into the city. We're very keen, if we are moving forward with a potential pilot scheme on consolidation, to develop this as a two-way process. If vehicles are bringing goods and supplies into the city centre, there's also the potential to take goods and supplies away from the city centre to service other needs. And, we've seen, the likes of John Lewis, who have a distribution centre at Trumpington Park and Ride, where you can go in there, you can buy things, and they'll take it out of the city for you. Well, we're very keen to talk to businesses, colleges, retailers in the city centre to see how we can develop this more two-way approach through any consolidation project.
Thank you very much. Another question regarding Victoria Road from Gaynor. Is there any chance of Victoria Road being considered for reclassification, given it's a narrow residential road unsuited to heavy traffic? I'm not sure whether that's more in the detail rather than the concept, Richard, but I'll let you.
Well, it is getting into the detail. I think we need to recognise that Victoria Road does form part of the main road network. Totally understand the comments that have been made about the narrowness of the route and the amount of traffic it carries. And, you know, let's be honest about it. We're not talking about a perfect ring road system in the city. And there are some areas that are better able to manage the traffic volumes than others. And I know that Victoria Road, I think, is a cause of concern. But clearly, if you were to downgrade Victoria Road, clearly there would be a high degree of transfer given how busy it is. And you'd have to consider, well, where is that traffic going to go if it's not using Victoria Road? Potentially, you're looking at a lot more traffic on Chesterton Lane and Chesterton Road. And whilst they are wider routes, there would equally be concerns there about that transfer. Yeah, I wouldn't completely rule it out, but I think it's a tough call if we start closing off sections of the ring road. By its very nature, the ring road is supposed to be a continuous circuit to allow traffic to circulate, but understand the concerns that are being raised.
Thank you. There are statements and sort of comments which I'm not taking as questions coming into the chats, but some of the common themes are about HGVs, about congestion, about air quality. So again, I'll just reiterate, rest assured, we are capturing these comments and statements that you're making. Another question's come into the chat from Sally Greaves. Some buses will not be going to the city centre, but to somewhere more peripheral. Where would that be, and how would travellers get to the city centre? Is that related to road classification, Richard, or is that?
Yeah, I think it's a very relevant question, given the suggestion that we would route buses slightly further out from the heart of the city. That would mean there would be a bit of a gap there. I think for many people, it means a bit of an extra walk, and that may well be good for their health and well-being. But there are other members of society that this may be a struggle and it may be a challenge. So we recognise that we've got to make sure that we don't discourage those people from accessing the city centre. So we're looking at how we can address that. Perhaps we can enhance things like shop mobility. We can provide better blue badge parking close to, but equally, we've suggested the idea of, should we revisit the city shuttle bus that we had many years ago? Could we have a zero emission vehicles that circulated in the area to pick you up at all those interchange points and take you through those key destinations in the city centre that people need to continue to get to? So I think it's a very relevant question and a very important issue that we need to consider if we're going down this route.
Great, thank you very much. I'll also point people to the dates that you gave in your presentation as well, because I'm also conscious of time. We've got 3 presentations to get through, and I was trying to allocate approximately sort of 30 minutes to each one. There's a few more sort of statements coming in there. Again, some supporting about the timing, shortcuts, some areas that will be adversely affected. But again, I'll just reiterate that we are taking those those statements away with us. If there's any final questions, I'll just ask anyone to just for a minute to pop them into the chat, or to indeed raise your hands. If not, I'm going to move on to Joe and the Camborne to Cambridge next presentation, quality impact assessments. If no other questions come in, I'd just like to thank Richard thank the community as well for raising some very good thought-provoking questions and providing some good feedback for us, which is exactly what we're trying to seek tonight. And thank you, Richard, for your presentation and your statements. So I can't see any hands and I can't see anything more coming up. So what I'll do, I think Richard may be leaving us now, because we're moving on to Camborne to Cambridge. But thank you for that. And I will now mute myself and hand over the floor to Joe Baker for Camborne to Cambridge EIA. We can see your presentation there, Joe.
Thanks. Can you hear me as well?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. Great, thank you. So, some of you will be aware, I'm Joe Baker. I'm the GCP project lead for Camborne to Cambridge, and this presentation today is really just to run you through the consultation we're running on the environmental impact assessment for that scheme. Some of you will have seen this presentation before. We are attending a range of different fora, parish councils, project-related events, but also this West Community Forum. So the project, again, as many people are aware, is a new public transport route that the GCP has proposed, linking Camborne to Cambridge, as you'd expect, via the new Bourne Airfield development, a new travel hub at Scotland Farm, Hardwick, and the West Cambridge campus. The scheme would provide an active travel path for pedestrians, cyclists, and horse runners running alongside and connecting with existing routes such as the planned Congestion Greenway and Madingley Road improvements to create a wider walking cycle network, as well as the public transport scheme. And in a minute, Lisa will be talking about greenways, so you'll actually be able to find out more from her then. Most of the scheme will be a dedicated busway without access for private cars. There are a few locations where it would need to run on existing road, but ideally where public transport priority can be assured. In terms of where we are now, this public consultation follows 3 previous public consultations and quite a lot of technical work, and many of you will have been aware of a lot of that over the last few years. And really the purpose of the consultation is to inform the environmental impact assessment so we can understand how we can best manage and mitigate the impact of the scheme on the landscape and environment. And the EIA is required as part of the scheme planning process. It's needed for any scheme where there are significant effects on the environment, and it includes information across quite a wide range of assessments, so things like ecology, landscape, noise, cultural heritage, land and air quality. The actual EIA itself will be set out in an environmental statement, and this all forms part of a portfolio of evidence that would be submitted to the Department for Transport as an application to build the scheme. It's called a Transport Works Act order, but it has a similar function to a more conventional planning application. The consultation is live now via ConsultCams. I'm sure George will put a link into the chat, and it closes at midday on the 11th of July. So the proposed route, which again will be familiar to many people, running, as you know, from Camborne to Cambridge, with the travel hub shown in yellow. And what I will do is take you through the key sections of that route in a minute. Just give you a bit of general background information on the scheme in terms of operational standards. The aspiration is to be served by modern electric public transport vehicles, so limiting air pollution and noise. We will look at the net carbon impact of the scheme and look at ways of limiting embodied carbon through the type and quantity of construction materials. There's commitment across the GCP programme to deliver a minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain for the scheme, and the goal of achieving 20%. And that effectively means that where we lose, for example, trees, we have to replace with at least 10% more. Looking to reduce wherever possible impacts on lands and activities, as you'd imagine, and the wider construction process will be in line with industry standard codes of practices. The main construction compound will be likely on the site of the travel hub. There will be some additional smaller compounds along the way used where we're at different parts of the route and to provide things like welfare facilities and storage. So the active travel path, as I say, that runs throughout. In addition, we are looking at a link up to Dry Drayton. That's to provide connectivity from specifically the Park and Ride site to Dry Drayton. And you can just see shown on this the green of the Congestion Greenway, which Lisa will be telling you more about, as well as the blue showing some of the improvements to Madingley Road. And there are other accompanying improvements to Madingley Road, which will be delivered hopefully through various private development schemes associated with things like Bourne Airfield. In terms of bus stops, the following stops are proposed, as you'd imagine: 1 at the west end at Camborne, 2 at Bourne Airfield, the travel hub itself, so all buses would go in and out of the travel hub, 1 in Hardwick, and we've asked in the consultation for views as to where in Hardwick that should be. There have been a range of different views expressed. We have proposed a bus stop in Coton. Again, there's been some discussion with the parish councils and residents as to whether or not a bus stop would be welcome there, but we're certainly keen to offer it and think it adds value to the village. And a bus stop providing a travel hub within the West Cambridge site. In the future, there's the potential to connect to a future Camborne railway station, which has been discussed as part of the East West Rail scheme. As things stand at the moment, there's no preferred scheme for East West Rail, so we're not in a position to design for that. But as and when a scheme is announced, we would obviously look to see how services would best connect to wherever that station might in due course be. The travel hub itself, this is just a sketch of what it would look like. Key things about it is looking at around 2,000 car parking spaces, potential charging provision, cycle parking, and the usual sort of security and comfort facilities that you'd imagine in a site of this type. In terms of some of the main environmental impacts and mitigations, and my colleague Nick Giesler from WSP is on the call, so he is able to deal with some more detailed questions on some of these points if you have those on the call. But I mean, the headlines, there's been some revisiting of the alignment around the waterworks site to the north of Coton to reflect feedback from stakeholders about the ecological value of that site. We've looked at landscaping of the route and travel hub throughout, and provision of things like bunds to screen the infrastructure, so low earth mounds, obviously things like tree and hedgerow planting in the right locations, and the potential for things like drainage ponds to create new habitats. Where there are pockets of agricultural land that are no longer viable, those can be potentially planted to create new habitats. Main structure on the route is the M11 overbridge, and we'll look to off-site construction techniques to minimise the amount of construction needs to be done on site, but there's a further elevated structure to get over the Bin Brook and make sure that the scheme doesn't result in any further flooding risk to the Bin Brook. We're aware of concerns about things like rat running, places like Bourne and Dry Drayton. Obviously, we'll be keeping close eye on those and what measures are needed to minimise risk. And where this scheme intersects with existing roads, we'll be looking at provision of traffic signals to ensure safety. So just running quickly through the length of the scheme. In Camborne itself, we are mainly running en route. As we said, in the long term, if we're clear where a Camborne station is, we may then consider how we connect to that. But for the time being, the aim is to get into the city centre. And then to the east of Stirling Way, there is a short section of bus-only link, which leads through to the Broadway to connect to Bourne Airfield, and that would be controlled probably by automatic number plate recognition cameras that would deter the use by cars. As a result, there shouldn't be too much disruption during construction because most of this road is already there, but there is potentially some opportunity for landscape improvement around a bus stop in the centre. Moving to the next section through Bourne Airfield, and again, this, as most people will be aware, is site proposed for development. So what we show is an alignment within that development master plan. I think the bus stops are proposed at either end. We and Countryside developer are very aware about the concerns in Bourne about rat running through the village, and junctions will be designed to minimise that. And again, because this area is being cleared as a development site, there's scope for putting a construction site compound here as well. Once we leave Bourne Airfield, we're then into new sections of route. We would cross over to the A428, the other side of the St Neots Road, west of the existing roundabout and round the back of Childley Lodge. So there would be some impact on properties at Childley Gate, but we would be clearly looking at sort of noise mitigation measures and what might be required at that location. The actual removal of private lines should be minimised around the north side of Childley Lodge. Some of you may be aware that some of the land at the west of the area north to St Neots Road is scheduled for employment in the draft local plan. And if that were to happen, then we would clearly look to work with that. There is potentially scope for the travel path to serve it and a new bus stop at some point to be provided. Looking at the travel hub itself, the route, the map, the site itself I've showed you, but you'll see the yellow line going up towards Dry Drayton. The aim is to have another active travel path going up that way, looking to run the mixture along verge where it exists or behind the back of hedge lines where we can't go on the verge, and there are a couple of existing gaps in the hedgerow to enable it us to do that, clearly looking carefully at the impact of that on the landscape, but also more importantly, the travel hub, and particularly screening around the travel hub with the potential, as you see, to create new habitat around a drainage pond to the east of the site. And again, this is likely to be the principal works compound, as well as providing the NMU route up to Dry Drayton. We'll also look at traffic management issues relating to through traffic from down Scotland Road as part of the transport assessment, and any risk of increasing that as a result of provision of the park and ride. Coming on to Hardwick, the preferred route as the scheme was approved by our executive board was for an off-road route between the St Neots Road and the A428. That created quite a lot of debate with Hardwick residents and some strongly expressed concerns about the loss of trees along the St Neots Road. As a result, what we have proposed in this consultation as an alternative to that would be the use of a bus gate on St Neots Road to the east of Cambridge Road, just to the west of Long Road, so that we would restrict through traffic on St Neots Road and leave the majority of St Neots Road to be a priority route for public transport vehicles to follow. We're aware there's been quite a bit of debate about that. I'm sure we'll come back to that in the questions, but the idea of this really is to provide an alternative which minimises the loss of trees through Hardwick. In terms of bus stop locations, as I said, we had considered Cambridge Road. Some members of the parish council suggested Miller's Way might be more suitable, and we're very interested in people's views as to which they think may or may not be more appropriate. The alignment, as you can see around the waterworks, has been amended compared to what was in the announced preferred route, again, to mitigate the ecological impact around the waterworks. And we've always said we'd be committed to work with National Highways to try and improve the A428 noise barriers, which currently contribute to a fairly poor environment along St Neots Road for residents associated with existing traffic. Coming to the next section, which runs to the north of the village of Coton. It crosses Cambridge Road to the north of Coton, no closer than at least 40 metres from the nearest properties. We have refined the route to try and keep distance from properties, reduce visual impact, but also maintain the viability of the land parcels in the area, designed to fit into the landscape to make sure infrastructure isn't visible from points from which you may be able to see it. Clearly buses would be visible even if you can't see the infrastructure, but the aim is to use things like trees, hedgerows and earth mounds to obscure the route where we can. You'll see locations for potential drainage ponds and where there may be some potential to for woodland planting, particularly as we pass closest to the north side of the village, where there are some pockets of land that may then become redundant, and that may be an opportunity to create some additional screening. And as I said, the potential is to provide a bus stop on the Cambridge Road with traffic signals at the junction. In terms of the next section, which is over the M11 bridge to West Cambridge, the route basically follows Charles Babbage Road through the campus, using traffic signals to ensure public transport priority. And as I said, the M11 overbridge itself is the main structure on the route. You'll see to the west where we pass through the orchard. Then as we by the M11, there is a section of woodland which is designated as a local nature reserve. There will be some loss of trees there, but we will look to restore and extend planting alongside the motorway to sort of compensate for that. And as you'd imagine, around West Cambridge, there's likely to be a range of segregated cycle and pedestrian paths, really to maximise connectivity to and from the site. On the final section, this section takes us from West Cambridge to Grange Road. It's important to be clear, bus services don't terminate at Grange Road. Services will continue on existing roads to the city centre and onto destinations such as the station and the biomedical campus. As we've always said, the plan is to follow the route that the U-bus follows. Obviously, the precise routing will be agreed with operators as things proceed, but there won't be buses trying to terminate in Grange Road, which clearly would be very difficult and unhelpful in terms of people trying to get to their destinations. The route through the Westfields has been refined over the last few years to minimise the loss of agricultural land. There are then some pockets of land to the east of it where there's potential for things like drainage, ponds and planting. There are some loss of hedgerows as we cut through to get down towards Grange Road, but we are looking to protect the most mature trees. Again, as I say, there's a bridge over the Bin Brook to protect and minimise flood risk, and in doing so, we'll probably have some additional planting, which again will help the area to absorb water when there is heavy rainfall. So just in terms of the next steps for the scheme, we'll be presenting the results of the consultation to our Joint Assembly and Executive Board, and subject to their approval, it will then go on to the County Council, either the Highways and Transport Committee or potentially full council, and then finally published online on our website. Subject to all the various levels of member approval, we would then submit the environmental statement as part of the Transport Works Act application, and that's anticipated for late 2022, late 2023. We'd anticipate that being scrutinised by a public inquiry, and if all those various stages are proceeded through successfully, the aim would be to start construction in 2024, with a scheme opening in 2026. I think my colleague Laura may just give you a few words about the some mechanics of the consultation process itself.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. So the ways that you can respond are you can view, there's a consultation hub. So the link has already been put up in the chat, so you can get straight to the consultation hub through that link. All of the documentation and materials are available to view and download there. But should you want a print pack, you can call us and request one. If you prefer to view the materials in print, or if you need a particular format, you need a large print or Braille or any other language, then just give us a call and we can organise that. There are various ways to respond. You can also email, and you can post the questionnaire back should you wish to receive a printed version. The easiest and quickest way though is to view the materials and to complete the survey online. And the consultation closes on the 11th of July. We're also out and about, as Joe mentioned at the start. If you can just move on one slide, there are a number of other events. You can come and see us in person. Our public exhibitions are on the 14th of June in Camborne at Camborne Village College, and also another on the 30th of June at Selwyn College at the Diamond Room there. Obviously today's the West Area Community Forum, but you can come and see us in person. We'll have public display, we'll have display boards, sorry, and you can ask any questions of the project team who'll be there. It would be good if you could register for those events. It's not essential, but it helps us manage numbers. If you can go online, if you do plan to attend, and register for the physical events, and that just helps us manage the health and safety aspects in particular. And I think that's it from us.
Great, thank you, Laura, and thank you, Joe, for your presentation. It's time to move on to questions now on Cambridge Environmental Impact Assessment. A couple have come in the chat, but please, if you want to verbalise your question, please do stick your hand up, and I'll come to you in order. So one hand gone up there. I'll just address the two that have come into the chat first, and then, oh, actually the hand's gone down again. But anyway, please do raise your hand if you want to ask a question in the chat. So the first question has come in from Marilyn, and it's regarding Coton, Joe. The question is related to clarifying the route through Coton and where the Coton stop will be. I think just going back to Marilyn's point, it was about on page 28, section F, versus what's shown on there heading north of Coton, whereas on page 38 it's shown slightly differently. So it's whether it's north or whether it's through the village. I'm not sure whether this is specifically related to the EIA, Joe, but I'll give you the floor anyway. Okay, and also, sorry, just one other point is to acknowledge Marilyn is not to deflect away from questions being raised in this webinar, but I think that the team are due to come to speak to Coton Parish Council about things at some point next week. But anyway, sorry, Joe, over to you. Yeah, so the route goes to the north of Coton. The route does not go through the village. Coton, Marilyn, I'm sure you're aware of, is a village with a street going through it. You'll be aware of the area around the village hall and the church, and the route does not go through the village. It goes through the parish
which is called Coton, but it does not go through Coton Village. And that's why, to make it clear to people, we've been clear that it goes to the north of Coton.
Okay.
The point about the bus stop of that may well be correct. If it says east, it is to the west of Cambridge Road, is what is being proposed. It's not just stop. I don't need to. It is a bus stop. So yeah, but if it does say that it's to the east, then you're correct that the proposal is to the west. However, we've tried regularly to engage with the parish council on details of the bus stop, and we would be really pleased to have some constructive discussion about how to make best use of that when we come and visit yourselves.
Great, thank you, Joe. There's a number of questions that have come in following Marilyn's from Erica and Gaynor and Jane. I'll come to those in a moment because I've just seen that, Marilyn, you've put your hand up and you're the first one to do so. So I may have done injustice to your question. So I'll ask George if you could just unmute Marilyn and you can verbalise your question if it's a follow-up one for Joe.
Yes, I would just like to make the point that the route does go through Coton. It's not north of Coton. I think we can pick this up maybe in the parish council discussion next Tuesday, but it very clearly does go through Coton, and there are Coton houses north of your route along the Madingley Road. So I think that is misleading.
Well,
thank you.
I mean, okay, you're entitled to your view. Thank you.
Okay, Marilyn, thank you for that. And as I said, we'll move on to some of the questions, but say rest assured that the team are coming to speak to the parish council next week. So hopefully you might be able to sort of meet some common ground on that question. I will move on to Erica. You had some questions. Sorry, I'll just go to it because some people have been responding to you. But it's about the Binbrook crossing. You're asking for a visual. Laura has put in the link to where that is in the thing, but you're asking specifically about looking at that image, about the height. I don't want to put the team on the spot because I don't know if they have the precise sort of measurements of that, but I'll go to Joe and the team if they do. If not, it may be something we need to come back to, Joe.
So yeah, so it's not particularly elevated. We are doing some further flood risk modelling as part of the EIA work, and that will help us agree with the Environment Agency as to precisely the height that's needed. But it's likely to go no more than about a metre over the prevailing ground level. You'll probably be aware, if you're familiar with the area, that it dips down at the moment to the actual Binbrook itself and the bridge, so it'll be a little bit higher above that. But if you look at the rest of the field where the Binbrook cuts through, it shouldn't be more than about a metre over and above that level, and that's something we'll try and come back to. Maybe just while we're on the Binbrook, there's a question about protecting water quality in the Binbrook, and just to add on that, you'll see various places along the route where we've got ponds shown, and those ponds are not just to look pretty, they're drainage ponds, and the idea is that any sort of runoff from the scheme would be routed into those. Typically you have things like reed beds that are there to then help purify the water before it drains off into streams like the Binbrook. So and again, the issue of discharge into the Binbrook is something we'd need to pick up with the Environment Agency as well, so that they were comfortable that any discharge would be not contaminating the Binbrook.
Great, thank you, Joe, and all, you know, for the original answer, and also that answering that follow-up point as well. That's appreciated. I'm now going to move to a question that's come in the chat from Gaynor Mears, which is, Joe, just before the route goes over the M11, a wood/nature reserve was shown. Why cannot the route go around the edge of the wood to prevent damage to loss of vegetation? Are you able to answer that? So
to the west, we've got the Coton Orchard, and then to the east there is the nature reserve. We've looked at a lot of different alternatives in that area as to which way to go, and we can't effectively get through. We then need to get into, I'll maybe go up back onto the map. It might be easy to show. So this is a location we're looking. We've got the orchard area here, and then we go through, and this is the designated local nature reserve. As you can see, this is there's a range of allotments here, and then there are properties along the footpath here in Coton. So as you can imagine, we really aren't in a position to go further south there, because we're then sort of starting eating into that land. We did look at a line which went a little bit further south. The problem is we've then got to get around the West Cambridge campus somehow. We did look at one point about a route that went along here, but then there are some environmental impact issues with some of the university laboratories here, which were put in that location to be shielded away from the road. Hence, we're now back on Charles Babbage Road. And again, if we go to the north, then we would be hitting all of the buildings here. So I mean, I think we've come up with as optimal routes as we can. The land that's designated as a local nature reserve actually is planting that was put in after the M11. So whilst it is designated as a local nature reserve, it's not ancient woodland particularly. It's something that can be relatively replicable.
Great, thank you, Joe. Just looking at the questions, Heather, Joe's answered yours. He picked that up about the bin, Brook. The next question is from Jane Anderson. Joe, can you clarify the route between Caldecote roundabout and the roundabout at Hardwick Streets near its road, busway versus cycle route?
Sorry, I'm just trying to I presume you're talking about the section through Hardwick, busway versus cycle. So I'm trying to. Is it possible to unmute Jane? Maybe.
Yeah, Jane, if you want to, if you're happy to speak, Jane, I'm happy to unmute you, just so that we clearly understand your question. George, if you could. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can, yes, you are. Thank you, Jane.
Hi, it was actually the route just before this one. So I don't know if you could go back a slide. So it's this bit. So we've got coming from the top end, there seems to be, you know, where there's a purple line and an orange line, and I'm just a little bit confused which is which.
Okay, well, effectively the purple is the bus route and the orange is the cycleway, but they both run directly alongside each other. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a bit where they don't. So, you know, I can be honest and say I live right at the top of St. Neots Road in this area.
So it's the cycleway would cut down. The buses would all go round the roundabout up to the Park and Ride site.
Thank you very
much. If that's reassuring.
It is reassuring.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Joe, for that response. Able to reassure Jane there. The next question I'm going to come to is Melanie. How do these plans impact on the village of Cumberton? Also, what is the current state? Oh, well, you've talked about the East-West Rail proposals, you know, saying that we don't actually have a design yet there. But can you talk about the impact on Cumberton?
So directly, it's still quite away from Cumberton. Again, picking up Marilyn's point previously, the scheme does go through part of the parish area of Cumberton, but a long way away from the village. In terms of impact, so there's no direct impact to the scheme. In terms of traffic movements, there may be some movements. Obviously, if we close part of St. Neots Road to the east of Hardwick, it may be that there will be some vehicles taking slightly different routes to and from villages such as Toft and Cumberton, depending on where they're going to. But whether it has a net positive or minus, I think it's probably fairly marginal. In terms of East-West Rail, at the moment, you'll be aware there was a consultation. I'm trying to think how long ago it was. I think it was probably about a year and a half. And we are still waiting for the outcome of those proposals and the consultation. So like yourself, we are awaiting clarity. We've all said we'll try and work with what comes through from East West Rail, but I really have literally no more information yourself as to where things go. So as and when they decide on a scheme, yes, absolutely, the two plans have to link and fit together. We've sort of engaged with East West Rail officers over the last few years, but until there's a sort of more governmental level decision on the way forward, then it's difficult for us to know exactly which way they're likely to be going.
Thank you, Joe. Laura's, I think, is going to come on this point, and then Gaynor, I'll come to your second question, Laura.
Yeah, I just wanted to interrupt really quickly because I missed a point. It's not only Colton Parish Council that we're at next week. We're actually going out to all the parish councils over the next couple of months, all the parish councils that are along the route. So if check out your we're probably on the agenda at your next parish council meeting should you want to see us in person there too.
Thank you very much, Laura. I was hoping someone was going to make that point, and that it is that we are indeed doing all of them. So thank you very much for clarifying that. I'll move on now to again. Sorry, there's one hand up. I'll come to the hand in a second, but I'll just go to Gaynor. Just got your question up here. Grange Road is narrow and has traffic calming measures. How will the buses navigate this into the city, Joe?
So absolutely, Grange Road is narrow. Most of the roads in the centre of Cambridge are narrow, and we do have a real challenge. And in some ways, that's why the work Richard is doing is important, is that we are trying to rebalance, reprioritise the city so it's less subject to congestion from other traffic. Grange Road is also navigated successfully by the U-bus service already, and effectively our buses will do the same as the U-buses do at present. So no, it's clearly a challenge. And, you know, there's been a lot of debate about why is the scheme terminate at Grange Road. Clearly at that point, we head into the conservation area in the city centre. So there's really no scope for significant construction works at all. But we make the best use of the network as existing buses do.
Right, thank you very much. The hand that was up has gone down now. So I'm going to come to Heather, and this I think is a question for yourself, Laura, because it refers to Joe's penultimate slide and the point that we were just making about talking to parish councils and the consultation you're running. So Heather's asking about, will we be talking to residents' associations?
We certainly have spoken to North Newman's Residents Association previously, which is the one I'm aware of, and very happy to do so again, if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Right, I see no, oh, sorry, Timothy, you've just put your hand up. Timothy Lawson. George, can you unmute Timothy, please? It's Timothy. Timothy, you're on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, Timothy. Yeah, please go.
The proposal that's been talked about by Mr. Baker seems to assume that the travel hub is a complete given. I'm not sure what the purpose of having Messrs. Armitt and Newman of WSP on this forum are, but I'm asking Mr. Baker and them if they are aware of the WSP response to consultation on better bus strategy, project reference 11501632, done by WSP, DAB, whoever he may be. Are they all aware of that response?
Thank you for your question, Timothy. Joe, I'll go to you first if you want to sort of take that question initially, or bring others in, or if there's one we can take away. But I'll let you speak first, Joe.
I'm aware that there was a piece of correspondence a few years ago. I don't think it has any direct relevance to this environmental impact assessment, but yes, I'm aware of that. I don't think my colleagues from WSP will have been aware of that. Certainly, Mehmet wasn't working with WSP at the time. So do you have a question related to the environmental impact assessment or the consultation?
Yeah, well, it's the environmental impact assessment of the travel hub proposed as against the other 7 that were considered back in 2018.
So during the course of the development of the scheme, we've developed an outline business case that was supported by 3 options assessment reports. Those documents are all published. And as you're probably aware, there was quite a bit of debate about the scheme over the last couple of years. And as a result of that and the need to put some of the concerns to bed, an independent audit of the business case process was commissioned. That reported to our executive board almost exactly a year ago, and concluded that the process development of the scheme was sound and that we should move forward with environmental impact assessment. So the current consultation, the IA, is dealing with the preferred scheme. We're not going back through the historic assessment of a range of alternatives, and many alternatives, both alignments north to the north of the road, along road, and to the south of the road have been assessed along with multiple park and ride sites, but that's not really where we're at in this stage of scheme development.
Well, you may not be, but are you aware of what were the best two assessed sites at the outset?
There was a process of optioneering for them, and I'm well aware. I believe you have possibly some interest in land north of Cambourne, and we have corresponded on that, and we're happy to carry on corresponding on that. It's not necessarily part of the EIA that we're trying to consult on now, but yeah, we're very happy to consult further with you on that if you want to have a discussion around it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just want to be quite clear that Bourne Airfield and a site north of the A428 were deemed to be very much the best sites, and Bourne Airfield was chosen only because it was going to be in a development. And when the Park and Ride, or now called Travel Hub, was no longer going to take place in Bourne Airfield, I'm simply asking the question, why is the other agreed to be very best site by miles, not the site now?
So the land that I think you have an interest in north of Cambourne has some merits in terms of the fact it's outside the Greenbelt. It has perhaps less environmental concerns. Operationally, what it doesn't do is actually provide a service, for example, for people coming from Bourne Airfield and other potential locations. So, you know, it could be people coming up, maybe from Comberton, for example. So it's quite a long way out, and operationally, it was made clear that from a bus operating point of view, it was simply too far out. If you look at where other park and ride sites are located around the city, and indeed other cities, generally they're in ring road locations, and the Cambourne one is a long way out. You'll be aware that for a long time GCP was looking at locations around the waterworks and Madingley Mulch, which was trying to get it further in. There was a lot of concern raised, particularly from Coton residents, and as a result, we came to a compromise of a site further out at Scotland Road, but avoiding going too far out. So, you know, we looked at a range of sites towards the Madingley Mulch area, in the middle and further out, and in the end, the view was to proceed with Scotland Farm, but that was a decision that's gone some way behind, probably about 4 or 5 years ago now.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Timothy. I'm going to move on from this question. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the response. I'm conscious of time, and I'm also conscious of the point that you've made, Joe, that you're in some level of correspondence with Timothy. So if there's any further follow-up that can be done on this point, then it can be taken offline. There are, Jane, thank you for your comments. We've picked that up, which isn't a question, just regarding the road in Hardwick. We'll capture that, and indeed any other statements that have been made. So thank you very much for that feedback. There are no more hands up, and I'm very conscious that it's 7:15 now. So I'm going to move on from Cambourne to Cambridge Environmental Assessment and move on to the Greenways for our final panellist and presenter of the night, Lisa Bloomer. And Lisa, I'll mute myself, so the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, John. I'll just share my presentation. Can you all see that okay?
Yeah, we can. It's a bit contracted, but I think you're on full screen, so it's legible.
Is that better?
It was actually a bit bigger before. It's just squashed it in slightly, but I would proceed as it was. People should be able to read it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Yes, evening everyone. I'm Lisa Bloomer. I'm one of the GCP Greenways project managers. So I'm overseeing the design and development of a number of the Greenways routes, including those in the west sort of area that we'll touch on tonight and go through a bit of detail of where we are currently. I'm just going to start with a bit of the background to the Greenways, a bit of an update of where we are currently across the whole network. So hopefully you're aware, but the Greenways network consists of 12 active travel routes, and they run from surrounding areas and villages and settlements into the city centre. And the aim of the greenways is to provide safe, well-connected, active travel links for walkers, cyclists, and where possible, horse riders. And final board approval, so from the GCP Executive Board, was given for the Greenways project in December 2020. And then since then, transport consultants, which are Atkins and WSP, have been appointed to take forward the development and design of the greenways. And work has been advanced through technical concept design stage, and there's been a lot of surveying going on lately. And I've got some more details on that to follow in my other slides. Just to set out that in terms of the routes, we have tried to sort of split those into areas. So we've got the north routes, which are St Ives and Waterbeach, and they are being taken forward and designed by Atkins Transport Consultancy. And we've got the south routes, which are Sawston and Melbourne, again being taken forward by Atkins. We then have the east routes, which are Fulburn, Horningsea, Bottisham and Swaffhams, and they're being taken forward and worked on by WSP. And we have the west routes, which we're going to sort of focus on tonight, which are Haslingfield, Barton and Comberton, again being worked on by WSP. And I should also mention that the Linton Greenway is also part of the overall network of routes, but that's being taken forwards by the CSET project, so the Cambridge South East Transport Project. So that's being progressed a little bit faster and separately from the rest of the greenways currently. So I'll just come on to a bit of an update on what we've been working on across the network, so across the greenways. So we've been developing a wayfinding strategy, and when I talk about wayfinding, I mean consistent signage across the greenways network to guide users. And on this slide to the right, there's just a few examples from elsewhere, just to give a sort of flavour of what I'm talking about when I'm saying wayfinding. So that strategy is underway and being developed, and we'll be looking for feedback from key stakeholders, parish, district and county council on that as we go forwards. We've been undertaking land referencing across the network to understand land ownership across the greenways. We have been developing a programme outline business case. So that sets out the overarching strategic case and the objectives for development of the greenways. And that will go to our executive board in October this year for sign off. We've also been undertaking early contractor involvement, and so that means we have appointed a contractor who will take forwards and construct the greenways. And it's really useful to have them on board early so that we can consider any build and construction considerations at this point, and trying to incorporate those into designs, etc. So it's very good to have that sort of early on in the programme. And in terms of the actual design stage that we're at, so we've just recently sort of completed the technical concept design stage. So that's been completed for Comberton, Haslingfield and Barton. So the schemes that we're talking about tonight. And the next stage that follows on from that is the technical preliminary design stage. And that's just kind of starting for Comberton and Haslingfield. So we are still sort of at quite an early stage in designs at the moment, building on what was taken out to public consultation previously. So in terms of the west routes, Comberton, Haslingfield and Barton. So the current position, we have, as I mentioned, recently completed the technical concept designs, and those route alignments follow the agreed alignments. So they were taken out for public consultation and refined further, and then they were signed off by the GCP Executive Board, and I've just put the dates there as to when they were signed off. So they follow those route alignments that were consulted on. And we're now sort of starting to work on the preliminary design stage. So that involves a lot of varied technical work, which I've tried to sort of list some main points here. So the teams are undertaking a lot of site walkthroughs, site visits to look at particular elements of the routes. They're undertaking topographical surveys. So that's where we look at particularly the levels of man-made and natural features, because obviously differences in levels can really affect design proposals. They're also undertaking utility searches, so looking at things like gas pipelines, overhead power cables, anything that might, again, affect designs. They're undertaking technical assessment of proposed structures. So any sort of proposed bridges, those sort of structures are being looked at in more detail, and the sort of feasibility of those currently. They're undertaking a planning and environment strategy, and alongside undertaking a number of environmental assessments, and the main sort of topics that they're looking at are listed on the slide. Also looking at drainage design, the approach to lighting that's going to be taken across the network and on these routes, pulling together a cost estimation. We're undertaking stakeholder engagement, which I'll come on to in a bit more detail. And the team are also trying to identify any quick wins where we can go out and deliver sections for users a bit quicker in the programme. And this stage is sort of running from now until the end of the year, so until December 22. So in terms of engagement on these routes, we will be undertaking some public engagement, which will build upon the previous public consultation, which was undertaken in 2018. So we'll be undertaking public engagement on Congestion and Haslingfield greenways in summer. And in autumn, we'll be undertaking public engagement on Barton. And that's just because Barton is a little bit further behind in terms of design proposals. So that's the sort of programme that we're running to. So the engagement will be a combination of in-person and virtual forums. So we will be running a webinar on each of the greenways as well. And we will make sure that we've got obviously all of the information online for people to access. In terms of the in-person drop-in events, the current dates that we're working to, if any of these change, we'll make sure that we really highly publicise that, and we'll contact all attendees of this session to make sure that we let you know if there are any changes. But the dates that we're working to, and we've booked the venues, etc., are the Congestion Greenway will be at Congestion Village Hall. We will be there on Friday the 8th of July between 2 and 7 p.m. And for the Haslingfield Greenway, we'll be at Haslingfield Village Hall on Tuesday, the 12th of July, again between 2 and 7 p.m. So we hope that, you know, a number of you on this call and your sort of community can hopefully come and meet us and the design team and talk through the current proposals. In addition to that public engagement, we are undertaking stakeholder engagement. So we've been holding a number of meetings and workshops with local authority officers, with the non-motorised user forum. I'm currently setting up a number of meetings with parish councils and landowners, and in addition, stakeholders like Network Rail and National Highways. And the purpose of all of this engagement, so the public and the stakeholder, is that we want to share our emerging designs, and we really want to get feedback on those so that we can incorporate that into the next stage of designs. So that was the sort of timescale and proposals for the public engagement for Congestion and Haslingfield in particular. As mentioned, Barton will follow in autumn. And then, as you can see, we will be undertaking public engagement across all of the remaining greenways routes across the rest of this sort of year. And this is the outline programme for that here. And obviously further detail will follow as soon as we've got those consultation events, etc. set up. So just to finish, in terms of next steps across the greenways programme, so we'll obviously be working further on the designs, undertaking the public engagement that I've mentioned, and then the following sessions for the other routes. The programme outline business case that I mentioned earlier with the sort of objectives and aims of the greenways, and a programme delivery timeline for all of the greenways will be taken to the Executive Board in October. And then construction work may start on some sections in next year, so 2023, but that would be where only council land is required and there's no additional planning permission needed. So those kind of quick win sections that we're trying to identify currently. And currently completion of the Greenways network is programmed for the end of 2025. And I have just put a link to our website on here as well, because it has got more information about the Greenways as a whole and then individual web pages for each of the routes. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for that presentation. We've had a couple of questions in the chat already, but as with the previous two presentations, please do stick your hand up or indeed put any further questions in the chat and I'll come to you. I'll take the ones that are in the chat first. Andrew Martin, you had a question about the Barton technical preliminary design, but Thomas has answered that already. So and that's in the chat. So hopefully that's that has indeed answered your question. It looks like it has to me. Andrew Martin has posed a question, and I'll read that to you, Lisa, which is the original plan for Barton was to have 20 mile per hour speed limits on the B1046 with speed cushions. Is this going ahead? So he's asking, you know, just reasons he's asking is to do with the sort of the timetable. So does that make sense, Lisa? Are you able to answer that? If not, I'll ask Andrew to come on. Andrew, actually, you've got your hand up. So before I come to you, Lisa, I will ask George to unmute Martin, and Andrew, please verbalise your question yourself.
Can you hear me?
We can, Andrew. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, the original schemes that we saw for the greenways going through the centre of Barton was to go to 20 miles an hour, which is right in front of the school, and you've got speed cushions there, and for the cycle route to go onto the road, which is ideally what we would want in Barton, to have 20 miles an hour and speed cushions to slow the traffic down in front of the school. So the question is this going ahead? The reason why I'm asking is because, you know, we have an opportunity to apply for LHI grants around about September time, and we're looking at 20 miles an hour in other parts of the village. So obviously we'd like to link into the Greenways scheme. So if you're consulting with Barton in October, that's after the September when we apply for the LHI grant. So is it possible to consult with Barton before then? And so we can iron out that part of the Barton Greenway scheme, and just to see how we can all link it together.
Yes, of course. Is that Barton Parish Council are you referring to, Andrew?
Yes, I'm a parish councillor in charge of the traffic and travel for Barton Parish Council.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And we would be, so that's kind of the timescale for the public engagement, but we would be looking to come out to stakeholders such as yourselves in advance of that. So if it'd be useful for us to have a discussion over the next sort of month or so when the designs are a bit more worked up, then I'm happy to arrange that, and we can certainly try and link up on the proposals, particularly going through the village. That
would be great. That'd be fantastic if you could do that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I will take a note of that. Thank you.
Do you have my details, or you just get through? Yeah, I'm sure you can find me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we will do. And Andrew, thank you for your question, and thank you for that response. Lisa, the next question in the chat is from Stephen Gaze, which I'll read out for you, Lisa, which is is pleased to see the link to Hardwick, but is struggling to look at it on the, I think, on the map. Can you please confirm, you know, sorry, struggling to see where it meets the main street on the map. Can you confirm where and how safe it is this is considered? So that's the first part of the question. And then the sort of supplementary question that Stephen's had, and is there a community consultation plan for Hardwick residents, or should they be going to the Huntington meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. So the link to Hardwick is part of the Huntington Greenway scheme and proposals. In terms of the exact alignment of that link, that's still being discussed, because we're having meetings with landowners at the moment, and exactly as you said, we're looking at where that should join Main Street, so what point that should come in at. So that exact alignment is still being considered at the moment, and options are being looked at, but happy to obviously talk through and hopefully seek some views from, particularly from Hardwick residents during the engagement, on where would be appropriate for that. But just to say, yeah, that link, the alignment has not been completely confirmed yet. That's still being discussed. And in terms of the community consultation, we are looking to just do one in-person event per Greenway route. As you can appreciate, we've got 11 routes to cover, so quite a few to fit in. So the Combaton event would be the one to actually come along to, but in addition we will obviously be supporting that with the webinar and with all materials online, so hopefully we can support it in that way.
Great, thank you, Stephen, for your question, and thank you for that response there, Lisa. The next question, still not seen in your hands, but the next question in the chat is from Leslie Sherratt, and again, it's quite a long one here, but I will read it out to you, Lisa. Part of the Haslingfield Greenway route was submitted under the Barton Greenway, which is the route that goes across the bulk and to the west of Grantchester. When you consult regarding the Haslington Greenway, will you be including this in all the maps, etc., so that the public can see the big picture? Apologies, Leslie, if I haven't done justice to your question. Please do stick your hand up if you want to add any more to that. But otherwise, hopefully that makes sense to Lisa, if you can able to respond to that.
Yes, it does. And I think currently, as Leslie has correctly said, that is considered part of the Barton Greenway. So proposals for that section are being progressed under the Barton scheme. So we wouldn't necessarily be presenting any sort of design proposals, which is what we're taking out at the public engagement. We're taking out sort of high level designs for people to comment on. So we wouldn't be sort of showing that level of detail or anything for that section in the Haslingfield events. That would follow in the Barton events instead.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Leslie, you do have your hand up, so George, if you can unmute Leslie, please, who probably has a follow-up question to that point. Okay. Leslie, you're unmuted now. Please go ahead.
No, it's just to stress that that's actually a really important point, because if you consult on the Haslington Greenway with only part of the big picture open to people, those who might have some objections to the Greenway route through Grantchester as currently planned will come across as sort of suggesting that a whole route that is available that will answer some of those objections isn't discussed at all. So there will be a lot of misinformation going on if you exclude the bulk route, the part of the Barton Greenway, from the Haslingfield consultation. And it was only an accident at the other end that sort of meant it wasn't included in the Haslingfield Greenway in the first place. It was always intended to be, but the thing had already gone to print, so it was a bit, and accidents like that shouldn't determine, the importance of such a route to this project.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Leslie. Maybe it's something I can take back to the team in terms of what we present at that engagement, and whether we show sort of even an overarching network map at the engagement, which obviously shows that link for the bulk path. So we can certainly have a look at presenting, as I say, that network map, which shows that link as well. Yeah, okay, thank you, Leslie. I'll see what we can do on that. But I think in terms of the actual level of detail, because Barton is still being worked up in terms of designs, we probably haven't got that to actually display at the Haslingfield event. But I certainly take your point, and I'll see if we can present an overarching network map to show that link.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thomas, you had your hand up and down. I suspect that Lisa made the point that you did, but please come in, Thomas, if you wanted to add anything to Lisa's response.
I was just gonna really follow exactly what Lisa just said. We'll look to make sure that there's kind of the wider greenways map is shown at the events, so that it's clear about the overall routing of the whole network. But as Lisa kind of alluded to, the specifics of each scheme will be focused on at that greenway event, with the kind of detailed design of that. But the kind of the overall strategic context will make sure that that's kind of well illustrated.
Great, thank you very much, Thomas, for adding that in. I'm going to come to a point made by Josh Newman in the chat here, because I think it's quite key points about, and this isn't necessarily different to any of the. I think it's a broad point across the three speakers, and might even be reference to some of the things that I've said as well. But it is important that we're interchanging the terms consultation and engagement. So I think just in terms of where you are in the project, can we sort of, is anybody able to sort of come in? Is this and just sort of clarify, particularly on this, because you're referring back to Camborne to Cambridge as well, in terms of will there be an environmental impact consultation for these routes, for these greenway routes? Sorry, it's about this, Lisa, as there was for Camborne to Cambridge. I don't know if yourself or Thomas is able to respond to that.
Yeah, I think in terms of sort of the first part of the question, the consultation and engagement, I am using engagement because we are engaging on specific greenways with sort of more focused engagement events, and it follows on from a large scale public consultation which was undertaken on the greenways sort of from 2018 onwards for a while. So I think I am using the term engagement because this is a more focused exercise, and it follows on from the larger scale public consultation, and we are sort of coming out with design proposals that we want to get some feedback on. So that's why I'm using that term of engagement rather than consultation, because the public consultation on the greenways, the large scale exercise, has been undertaken. And in terms of environmental impact, I might pass to Thomas on that point, if that's okay, Thomas.
Yeah, that's fine. In terms of the kind of permissions process for the greenways, it is slightly different to something like Camborne to Cambridge, which requires an environmental impact consultation as part of its Transport and Works Act order process. In terms of the greenways, they will be likely to go through kind of the standard planning application processes, and there'll be kind of statutory consultations on that level of detail through that. But we are also looking at, once we've gone from this stage, which is kind of technical concept, through to a much more detailed stage, what we do in terms of engaging with the community, when we've got levels of detail around items like, specific landscaping and such like. That's likely to follow probably into kind of next year.
Great. Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Josh, because it is an important point to clarify exactly what we mean. So thanks both for clarifying that. No hands up, but some more questions in the chat. Oh, sorry, there is one from Linda. Can you include C2C NMU route on those maps so that the whole of the available network can be seen at the same time? I'm assuming, Linda, that you're referring to on the greenways. If that's correct. If I've got that wrong, please stick your hand up. But otherwise, I'll hand back to Thomas and Lisa to.
So John, I came back in the chat to that one and just said we'll look at how we can integrate that and other routes. So yeah.
So you did. So you did, Thomas. Apologies. Thank you. Right, team, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't see, or community members, if I've missed anybody, but I can't see any other questions or any other hands up. But we've certainly got a little bit more time if anybody wants to ask any final questions, or please prompt me if I've missed any of them in the chat. I don't think I have, but I may well have done. Doesn't look like I have. Okay, well, in that case then, yeah, thank you, Lisa, for taking the screen down. I just finally, then I think we'll sort of conclude this this webinar. Thank you very much for all the questions and the comments and the statements and the feedback. Sorry, something's just come into the chat now. I'll just right, sorry, there's one I'll just go back because Emma's just put one on, but I'll take this as the sort of the final question, Emma. It's not clear, Emma's point again, this is for yourself, Lisa and Thomas, it's not absolutely clear from the discussion whether there is still scope via the planning process that Thomas described for consultation regarding your proposed routes. You seem to be discussing the design detail rather than the route. Thomas, would you mind just sort of responding to that final point, and then we'll close the meeting?
Yeah, I will. So the consultations that were already undertaken looked at where the routes were going, and those consultations took place throughout kind of 2019, and the decisions on the routes themselves have been taken by the executive board already. Therefore, what we're now doing is engaging on the kind of first kind of set of technical designs, which follow those alignments. There are a couple of minor amends which will be required, which are slightly different to the routes, of which point we will be kind of asking questions of the public about those minor points. But generally, the main consultation on the routes themselves has already taken place, so we're not looking to repeat that exercise. In terms of the kind of next level of engagement that we're doing, that's on the first level of technical detail. We are likely to come again to the public with the next level of technical detail, and again that'll be engaging to get feedback on the designs, but the next statutory consultation will be through the planning process itself, where there'll be the chance, as there always is, to kind of object to these things or kind of put forward statutory views. So we are collecting people's views, but that won't be specifically on the route. Yeah, Stephen Gage has just made a really good point there about the Hardwick spur, and that's one of those amends where we are struggling. At this stage we haven't got a specific route because we've had different feedback from kind of landowners and from users, and we are looking to come up with options for that, which we will consult on specifically. So there is intricacies within the greenways. It's not all kind of just everything in exactly the same place at the moment, but hopefully that's answered the two questions that have just kind of come up in the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, and a final one has come in from Sally, which is another one about process there. But what I sort of like to say both to Sally, to Josh, and to Stephen there is that these questions on process, and I'll use the umbrella term public participation, are kind of key. So thank you, Thomas, for clarifying that where you are on the stage, because that's obviously why we undertake stakeholder engagement. People need to be clear as to what they're doing. Thank you, Jess, for that comment, and I'm going to wrap up here. I just want to thank the community and councillors, parish councillors, and everyone else that sort of attended for your very good thought-provoking questions, your comments and the feedback. It's very important to GCP that we capture that. Thank you also to our presenters and also the behind the scenes GCP team who've supported this, who've been unmuting people, and everyone else. Thank you. Hopefully that's been a really informative webinar for people. You've got something out of it. And on that note, I'll bid you good night. Thank you.